Welcome, everybody. Really delighted to have Mark Yusko with us. He is both CEO and founder, I expect, of Morgan Creek Hedge Fund. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mark, and we're looking really forward to your economic take. How are you?
No, doing well, and thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation, Francis.
Absolutely. I've spoken to, I think, to mutual friends, Daniel DiMartino Booth, and one or two others. So really happy to have you on. Um, I'll give you a little bit of a sketch of our take, and I want to see how you come back on that because I've been listening to some of your materials. We had a key technical level at around 110.3, and we've been dominant dollar bias since very, very early. So we were expecting it to bottom at the upper 80s. We saw a technical reversal on the 94.5, and we've stayed hammer to the accelerator to the floor, and it's been an incredibly beneficial bias and a very risk-off generally bias, although we did have time for the equities rally that we've experienced back to a neckline on Head and Shoulders.
Yep.
How's your take for where we are now on the dollar and what's coming next in your crystal ball for the week or two ahead and then potentially beyond that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. Everybody's all excited about dollar strength and talking about the king dollar's back and like not so much. I mean, it's the least bad of all the major currencies, but all the major currencies are devaluing at a rapid clip against
Understood.
stuff, right? Against gold, against Bitcoin, against tangible assets. And really, what's interesting is the two currencies that everybody loves to hate, right? The renminbi and the ruble are actually pretty darn strong. Now, the renminbi's been a little shaky the last couple of weeks, but over the last couple of years, renminbi's stronger than the dollar. So, yes, the DXY, which everybody focuses on, you know, we're the king. The dollar is better than the yen, which is just being obliterated
Yeah.
by crazy Kuroda-san. Kuroda-san, he has no choice but to obliterate the yen. That is their only way out. They can't pay back the debt. They can't even service the debt. They're headed for a debt jubilee probably. So the yen has to be destroyed. But the euro has just been massacred as well.
Yeah.
And now today, oh, we're going to raise interest rates 75 basis points and try to stem the decline. But we're at 20-year lows on the euro, and it's just been an absolute thrashing. And it's part of it is most people don't focus on why was the euro even created, right? The euro was created to be a crappy currency, and I mean
It
crappy
was.
in a technical term, right? It was created to be a bad currency. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, Germany is a mercantilist, right? They make stuff, cars, machine tools, and they sell them to the rest of the world. Well, if you're a mercantilist, you don't want a strong currency like the Deutschmark. You
No.
want a weak currency. You want toilet paper for currency. So then you can sell your stuff really cheap and dominate markets like China. And so that's why they created the euro. And there's a bunch of Deutschmarks in a vault somewhere, happily waiting for the day that they can come back, but they're not going to get their time in the sun because if I'm the head of the Euro Commission, I want all the crappy countries, again, technical term. I want all the worst countries with the worst currencies and the worst economies to join up in the euro to thrash the euro lower and lower and lower so I can sell more stuff. And so on that comparison, if you compare the dollar to the euro and the yen, yeah, we look great. Okay, fine. But the problem is money printing. Money printing has gone ballistic. Now it's less ballistic in the last 6 months than the previous 18 months, but that previous 18-month period post COVID lockdown, and look, I'm firm believer, Francis, that the COVID weaponization, right? We took a flu virus, we weaponized it to make it something scary,
Yes.
and then we made these policy errors to lock down the world, which we'd never done in thousands of years, which is stupid. But we did that in order to justify this crazy, what I call the cult of Kelton, right? The MMT people, the people who believe that you can create wealth by printing money.
Yeah.
And Francis, here's the problem. If that were true, wouldn't every country just do it? Right? If it was as simple to create wealth as printing money, wouldn't every country just print as much money as possible? Well, we know that's not true. In fact, in history, right, there have been 775 paper currencies in the history of the world. 3/4 of them no longer exist, right? They
Yeah.
went to zero through money printing. And so
Correct.
the only money, right, actually only money in the world is gold. And money is
Yeah.
an asset that exists in the absence of a liability. Everything else is just debt, is credit. And when governments get indebted, they have four choices. They can pay it back. Well, they can't do that, right? If you taxed
Yeah.
all the wealth of Americans, you couldn't cover our debt. And
Yeah.
Japan's worse and Europe's just as bad. So you can't pay it back. So then you can restructure it. But to restructure debt, someone's got to take the other side. Someone's got to take 70 cents on the dollar. And Chinese and Russians won't even buy our debt at $1, let alone 70 cents. So that's not going to happen. You can default on it. Oh, no. If you default, then you're out of power. And people in power like to be in power, so they don't default. So what do? You inflate it away. And you inflate it away by printing more of it. So that's a long answer to, I hear people talk about dollar strength. To me, it's less weakness. So technically, I guess that's a form of strength. But I think the
Is it
developed
also
world.
not just, if I can come in there, Mark, is it also not just that it is the de facto standard and most systems are built around it? In some senses, America has even more debt than Japan if you look at unfunded liabilities. It just happens to be
Such a
the
great
biggest guy.
point.
It just
Incredible.
happens to be, yeah, the biggest guy in the room. So it falls last in essence. So everybody first, if there's a row of sinking ships and they're all on fire, but it's moving that way, they keep jumping from ship to ship. The biggest ship, which is the last to catch fire, is essentially the dollar. That doesn't mean it won't go up in a fireball even bigger than all the others come its time.
Perfect
It's
analogy. And what's really important about that analogy is, look, that has been the plan, right? The
yeah,
plan was kicked off in 1913 with the creation
yeah,
of the Fed.
yeah,
And the Fed was modeled after the Bank of England, which was modeled after the Bank of Amsterdam, which was created by the
correct.
Rothschilds
Yeah,
to finance war and
yeah,
to consolidate wealth at the top through theft, through inflation, right?
correct.
That's what inflation is. It's theft from the
Correct.
masses to the few. So you have this problem that you kicked off this plan in 1913. And then in 1933, you accelerated it by banning gold. You made it illegal to own gold in the United States.
Yeah,
And then in the 70s, you did the final death blow and you went off the
yeah.
gold standard,
Nixon, yeah,
went to a fiat standard,
yeah,
and you made it legal for people to own gold again. But you basically said that I can print money now at a whim by fiat. And in so doing, you set us on this path to where we are today, which is every developed country has massive liabilities, like say these unfunded liabilities for pensions, for Medicare, for Medicaid, for all these entitlements. I always joke, what's an entitlement? I'm an old guy, I'm a boomer, second to last year. And what's an entitlement? An entitlement is a promise you make to yourself that you don't fund and you ask your kids to pay for. Who
yeah,
wouldn't vote for that? I would vote for that 10 times out of 10, of course. It's money for me, free, and I don't have to pay for it. So we're at this point where the Western economies, like you say, are going down this path. And it all goes back to this big decision in 71 where we went off the gold standard. We cut a
yeah.
deal with Saudi and said, we'll protect you if you price oil transactions in dollars.
Correct.
And that made the dollar the hegemonic world currency. So here's the crazy stat. Only 8% of global trade is with the United States. Yet
Yeah,
up until the last couple of years, 60% of transactions were priced in dollars. Well,
correct.
that's changing in the last
Yeah,
18 months as China and Russia have created this new axis that runs from
correct.
Southeast Asia all the way up the northern side of Europe. And they are now transacting not in dollars. They're not selling Russian oil to China for dollars. They're doing it in renminbi and ruble. And that breakdown of the petrodollar system is I think why you're seeing this jumping from ship to ship is anyone who issued debt in dollars in a foreign currency is like, oh my God, I'm toast. So their currencies are collapsing. And you've seen that with the peso and the bolivar and the lira and all these things just get absolutely annihilated. Well, now you're seeing the yen and the euro get annihilated. Well, wait a minute, those are real currencies. If the bolivar goes away, no one, well, people in Venezuela care, but most people in America couldn't even point out Venezuela on a map. So you got this really interesting dynamic that the financial system is on fire, for sure.
Yeah.
Love the analogy. But it won't explode yet because there's too many vested interests for it not to explode quite yet.
Yeah. I have a feeling. So this is our scenario. There's a lot of people that are positioning themselves as contrarian and are actually just rinse repeating a collapse followed by further QE. And actually are calling bottom picking on stocks, expecting a melt up, and positioning very much like this. So everyone is now, it's almost as if people have been trained to expect the Fed to be put in place, and then for assets to be reflated back up as a result. And we're clearly already seeing pain. We've seen a redefinition of a recession. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that at some point as well, and everything that goes. And this wonderful red hot labor market, which is based on pretty poor statistics and doesn't take participation into account and the various other things, and has the birth death model and various other statistical shenanigans. So I actually have a feeling that this, and I'm really encouraged by the fact that you also weren't afraid to bring in a few, the Bank of Amsterdam and the people behind it. So thank you for being real out there on truth. I know it doesn't always serve you, but we're certainly interested in that. So if I mention the World Economic Forum and their lust for a great reset, I have a feeling that everybody is going to be counting on the Fed put going here. And this time, if they're waterboarding us and you're normally 10 seconds underwater and then they've got a fistful of hair and you're being brought up, this time the head is being held down. And you think, that's my 10 seconds, I should be getting air now. And instead they're holding it harder down, and there's 4 sets of hands, and now you're starting to inhale the water and it starts to smell a lot like a death spiral. And that they will take the pain to a much deeper level, in essence. Part of lowering and deflating, because part of the problem is the great middle classes of the world. If they've got this technological Bolshevik plan, we all represent the bourgeois. You and both I expect. They need to see our stock market portfolios wiped out. They need the perceived paper asset value of your amazing home. Maybe you're California, maybe you're Texas, but I'm sure it's a great place. Go right down, and many other people of similar standing. And it is a big hollowing out of the middle class, because that is essentially technological Bolshevism, which is what they seem to be very, very, very intent on doing. And to do that, a rate spike, which I think would be accompanied with a dollar super spike, which would kill the rest of the world first. In other words, the biggest ship helps burn the others first before imploding itself. And that actually then leads, and we're already seeing that. There's a sort of a meme. We equally bearish on the euro. We think the yen as a currency is even worse. People aren't so well equipped and aware of the East. Everybody knows about Europe's problems, and we love to beat up on them. But they're both terrible. But the degree, if you look at how much the yen's already moved, it's properly on fire. It doesn't seem to want to stop. Plus, when you look at, and I'm gonna sprawl my comment a little bit here, the demographic profile of Japan is far worse. They're an entire decade almost ahead of America, in that they have 0.91 babies, only beaten by Korea at 0.88. So we have dollar dominance FX trades against both those nations. But it's also a financial engineering nation state, because apart from Brent Johnson, who's coined the phrase and gets credit for it on the dollar dominance, the milkshake, we have a beyond milkshake perception, because it's the financially engineered nations that are not the dollar that are going to be destroyed. We're actually seeing that despite battling a little bit against the dollar during this period, the commodity-based nations, we've got setups, Australian dollar against the pound, New Zealand against the yen, a lot of others. And in the period that the dollar rests, these are pressing on quite nicely. we're going back to, and I've used Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and many people aren't familiar with that. So I shared a diagram on Twitter, but the base layer of human needs, the
Yeah.
physiological, the shelter, the food, the water, the energy, the power, and then the security layer too, instead of all of the self-actualization, the status, the Rolex, the Range Rover. I'm getting the economies that do more in that space once the dollar blow off has occurred could also be longer term. Because the only thing that makes me nervous about my dollar dominance positioning is there's a blow off that I'm expecting, and it's very much like a .com blow off. You need to get out at some point, and that's the role of gold and silver, which I refer to as almost the pedestrian archway from the old iron horse two-tracker rail to the new monorail system that I think they're trying to get us to. My big argument is, there's inherently inertia in people, and they're going to usher us from one system to another. How do you ensure that everybody is forced onto the monorail? You crash the train, you take the tracks up, it goes into the dirt. And in essence, then there is no other choice. So there's a sort of problem reaction solution, and we're in the early winding up stages of the problem, and then we're going to get the reaction of everybody's anger, rioting, shortages, and various other things, and then that solution, nicely neat and wrapped up, that they've been testing is going to be presented. How do you see playing it out? Because I'm leaning on the dollar dominance, I'm FX trading that, but I would argue even if you start making profits, the whole system will fail. There's counterparty risk. You could have the best trade and actually come out with nothing and have lost all your collateral as well. You've got to bleed out, and you've got to pivot those physical things. What's your comment in terms of that whole scenario?
No, look, I'm in violent agreement with most of the premise that, look, I think it is engineered, right? It's not a coincidence that WEF was created, literally incorporated the same year as we went off the gold standard in America, 1971. That's not a coincidence, right? Yeah. And so it's never coincidental that the elite families of the world tend to show up in the same places, right? They show up in central bank boards. They show up as board members of, major corporations around the world. I haven't verified this, but I read, and again, a lot of stuff you see now is fake, which is part of the problem of living in a modern society is people can create fake stuff. But it sounds true, and maybe it is true. But someone told me that the person who owns the patent for PCR tests is a Rothschild.
Richard,
like,
yes.
That would not shock me in the least, right? Wouldn't shock me.
Registered 15 or 17. I stand corrected, one of the two. So I physically fact checked that for myself, and I screenshotted that, and I went and saw it.
So it's little things like that where, to your point, I was very vocal about my disdain for loan forgiveness in the United States, right? Forgiving student loans. Because to me, someone's liability is someone else's asset.
Yeah.
So how do you cancel someone's asset, right? Well, they're like, well, the government already paid those people, so it's a government asset. Well, okay, but then you got to replace that asset that you just canceled. So what are you going to do? You're going to tax
more taxation people, on the rest of Americans,
more taxation,
or more printing,
more money printing. Those are the only two options.
Which means you pass inflation onto the rest. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the only two options. So, but
if I can just jump onto that, sorry, just to interrupt you before we get into flow there again. We've just got a similar example in the UK with the new PM, Truss. She's come out and said she's capping energy. So it's always seen to be doing socially friendly things, capping energy prices at £2,500 for an average household, which will be means tested. So it'll be sort of, we're helping the working poor type story. And the analysis of that is essentially they've now got a short position on energy at current levels, that if it goes higher, they are open-ended gaining a loss. And once again, they either tax more, that means everybody else pays for other people's energy, which is Bolshevism and communism, or they proliferate, which is dilution, which is inflation on everything else. So you may cap the energy for a bit, but food prices go even more up, and everything else you have to buy that makes up your basket of goods.
Of course, but price fixing has never worked in any way, right? Whether it's minimum wage, rent control, any form of price fixing is inferior. Interest rates is inferior to the market determining the price, right?
Correct.
If you have a problem with energy prices in Europe, which you do, it's because of bad policy decisions and bad decisions in terms of infrastructure and your reliance on a single supplier for 30% of your supply. Those were decisions that were made for money and power and politics and all. But it's those can't be fixed with price controls, to your point. So
Yeah.
I think the thing that's really interesting here is we kind of seen this game played over and over. But my point on the loan forgiveness is I was really against it until my wife pointed out, and I thought this was really interesting, that if you trace student loan debt explosion in the United States, you can trace it back to Ronald Reagan's term, where he had an advisor who basically told him that, look, our problem is we have this free education. California, New York, state schools are free, and they are educating the masses.
Yeah.
And the biggest risk to any regime is an
It's too smart and
educated.
populist.
Yeah. And so they're like, we need to stop that. I'm like, well, how do you stop that? Well, you make it cost money. Well, but then people were like, well, how do I get people money if I cut off their unemployment benefits and I cut off, well, I give them student loans. And so now then you had people who were living on student loans, even though they weren't necessarily really students, the professional things. But bottom line is you create a system that got abused, and now you are buying votes the same way you buy votes in Argentina by giving people free electricity, same way you buy votes in Venezuela by giving people free handouts, same way you buy votes in Canada by giving them gas cards. So that process is, to your point, it's collectivism, it's communism, and pretty much all isms are bad. Maybe not capitalism. I like capitalism, but every other ism, populism, they're all bad. And at the end, I keep coming back to this. I think it's part of the plan, right? I think it actually is, unfortunately, a long duration plan to continue to concentrate wealth at the top and keep the masses dependent on those governments. And one of my favorite lines about this is a good buddy of mine, and again, I'm an old guy, so he's old too. And he says, I remember a day when I didn't know the names of the central bankers.
Yeah.
I longed for the day to return. Now we view them as gods, and they're on the cover of magazines, and
Greenspan
we talk
was
about
the
them
first
every day. We shouldn't talk about them. They should have no power and authority. They should be bureaucrats functioning as part of an overall economic system. So to your bigger overarching question, can the system catch fire and collapse? I'm not quite in that camp. Raoul Paul did this thing maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Endgame. And it was the big picture of the swirling cyclone cloud, and the whole thing was. And I think there are elements that have gone into tornado or cyclone or hurricane, but overall, I think systems are pretty resilient because people are self-interested at the top. And so I don't see a total end game, but what I do see are innovations on the fringes that allow a portion of us to opt out and protect some of our assets, right? People have been doing that with gold for years, silver. Now you can do it with Bitcoin and other assets where we're taking this monetary element of commodities, right? Commodities are commodities, right? We use them for stuff. But some commodities also have this monetary use. And that monetary use is really important because we live in a world of money illusion, right? Stocks seem to be at all-time highs. Houses seem to be at all-time highs. But that's because we denominate them in devaluing assets.
Correct. Dollar.
Right?
The monkey on the greased pole.
An ounce of gold for 5,000 years. but we don't
Yeah.
price gold in gold. We price gold in dollars or yen or euros, and that
Yeah.
fluctuates. And my favorite stat is if you look at the S&P 500 in the United States, it's dead flat in gold rather than dollars since 1996.
Mm.
Like, what do you mean it's dead flat? Because all of the growth is just a devaluation of the currency we denominate those assets in.
Correct. And that ties very much into the debt, Reinhard and Rogoff's work, which was saying that beyond the 90%, the additional debt is counterproductive and just an accelerant to the eventual demise of the system. And I think that's kind of around about the 90s. And that also coincided with the rock star central banker, which was Greenspan era, who came in at 87 on the tail end of my baptism of fire in the stock market as I started, and picked off from Volcker all the way through, and had a number of presidential terms, and I think only stood down for Bernanke. We were already through 2000s, deep in the 2000s, and he became, the great rock star, and he's probably the biggest economic criminal in terms of the pump part of the eventual pump and dump scheme that we're eventually in. It's actually an interesting parallel, because it seems very much like the everyday crypto hood that runs a pump and dump scheme. We're actually in a just far larger, more elaborate central bank driven one, where there's been a number of liquidity based pumps, which have essentially been inflation, but asset price inflation. We use globalization that took some of the edge off actual day-to-day CPI price inflation, so that we had an extended cycle of excessive asset inflation. And then we choose to deglobalize and reverse that, which is essentially what's got on with Russia, Ukraine, and is threatening to happen. And hence our particular Asia-biased currencies shorts, China, Taiwan. And it's interesting to also see that Pelosi, if just on that one, Pelosi first went to Taiwan, and then we've had a couple of heads of state that have gone to Japan and Korea recently. And I wonder what assurances and comments are being passed between the US heads of states that are going. It wasn't Biden, but it was still fairly, it was the Vice President, Kamala. I wonder what messages are being passed on, and what sort of, in lieu of the particularly nervous state of Forex markets, they're avoiding media on it. They're not talking about the collapse of the Korean won as well. With all of that, they've got a very leveraged saving system, where in low rates they were essentially buying call options ever higher. And anyway, so there's a lot of Ponzi's to unwind.
No, okay. Francis, that's a really important point, in that what I think people really miss is this idea that, world reserve currencies don't last forever. Empires don't last forever, right? Every empire, everyone has failed eventually. And they fail for the same reasons. They fail because they get concentrated at the top. Cronyism replaces capitalism. They become collectivist, and they become appease the masses. They get over indebted, and they collapse and they disappear. Whether that was the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. Now, the interesting thing about the British Empire is the British Empire was the result of a series of, again, Rothschild-related changes, in that the world reserve currency was in Portugal in the 1400s, and then Spain took over Portugal, and they became the world reserve currency. Then France took over Spain. Then the Rothschilds create the Bank of the Netherlands, and they finance the takeover. And the Netherlands, think about this, the Netherlands was the world reserve currency for 70 years. Well, then a branch of the Rothschilds.
An important point that goes with that was the original $1 trillion market cap, when the dollar might have meant something. And you mentioned, thank you, that it was Dutch derived as well. The Dutch East India Trading Company, which is actually, I'm in South Africa, and our history is based on that. Essentially, I'm sitting in a country that was a vegetable patch for sailors going around the Horn of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, which was previously known in the storm. And that was trade with India and China. And that was all Dutch East India Company, which was all the coffee shops of Amsterdam and London. And it's the basis of the legal system. I don't want to get too wide on that, but
Oh no, look,
standing in
and it's all related
everything else.
because
Maritime
then,
law is all around us.
yeah, and then England, right, but then in 1913, interestingly, same time as the Fed was created, London, or the UK, invaded Mesopotamia, incurred massive debts, the pound sterling collapsed, the dollar ascended. Now, it took 30 years from
Mm.
1913 to 1944 for the dollar to become the new world reserve currency of Bretton Woods. But here's the thing, it was all based on naval superiority. To your point, maritime law.
Yeah,
It was all
yeah,
based on naval superiority. Well, I believe that a decade ago or so, pick a number, what the Chinese figured out was the next war, it's not ships, it's chips. That now in the digital age, it's about cyber
yeah.
superiority. And they, 96% of AI citations this year will come from China, 5G globally. And so they've quietly amassed this power structure. And now they're not so quietly, I think, weaning the world away from dollar hegemony with a plan to
Yeah.
become the world reserve currency and
But
the
on top of
dominant
it, if I
superpower.
may interject again, I agree with you. They're going to own the future, which is the tech and the sim. That's why we're getting this funny talk about shortage of chips. I wonder
Yep.
what other projects are planned that involve chips and humans. But anyway,
Mhm.
that separate
Yeah.
thought aside, they also are doing the old world because they're gathering up all the gold as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
want to have the thing. So they're doing new world and old world. It's a multi-pronged process where if they can control chips, future AI, and all of that, they're one of the first with the facial recognition. I'm sure you've seen the clips with this people walking in the streets and they're all being named, faced,
Oh yeah.
aged, etc. All the data is being shown. The sort of biometrics gone mad. And of course, they are the biggest importer of gold through Hong Kong, and they are the biggest miner of gold. Which brings us back to the ruble, which I flashed early on when you mentioned it as one of the charts, which has since ceased to underperform and has actually shown great robustness. Both energies and gold strong itself, and its cooperation with Taiwan, which is why I see the whole Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan as very much a forcing each other into their arms, if they aren't already, which they're very close,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
understandably already. But it just finishes it, it puts the ring on that wedding finger. And yeah, it's fascinating. And they both have been gold dominant, and clearly Russia's energy dominant. And we had an American representative that came here to South Africa. So I'm all over the world normally, but I'm currently in Southern Africa. What was quite interesting is there was an African a black indigenous African member of parliament who was mildly chastising her American counterpart, but not saying him per se, but says we won't be dictated to on who we be friends with. And South Africa being the S in the BRICS, which was also a little bit of the Saudi playing both sides as well, because they're not in the BRICS analogy, but there's been lots of requests potentially, and there's been a closening up of relations between the Russians and Saudi
Yeah.
as well. So it's just very interesting, as it's quite clear that it's almost like a mountain's coming out of the sea and the water is being parted to the left and the right now. And a number of people are just saying, we don't have to be too married to you anymore. You may be the dominance now, but we're not seeing it that way necessarily going forward. It's
Yeah.
kind of like we've all been prisoners in the cell, and America's been the bulky bodybuilder in the corner that everyone's tried to beat her up to and keep sweet. But now there's a couple of big guys that are in the other corner, and they're getting more of the food rations, and you've got to hedge your bets a little bit more if you want a good night's sleep. And not to get pounded in your
No,
rest.
it's
And
100% right. And look, the sun never set on the British Empire.
yes,
I mean, that was a fact. Today we
yeah,
don't talk about the British Empire. We don't talk about the pound sterling. London's a perfectly cool place. I went to holiday there this summer, and it's a nice place to visit, but it's not the center of the universe, and it's not the most powerful nation in the world anymore. And to your point, America it's still great. I love living here. It's a great place. But a couple things. One, we got really bad leadership. Just
Yeah,
generally speaking, we got really bad leadership. And
yeah,
and while I may not be a fan per se of Xi and his group, I think they're better leaders. I think they're better planners. I think they're better strategists.
they
And
play a longer game.
I think
They
they
certainly
have
play
a
a longer
plan,
game.
right? A
Yeah, yeah,
30-year plan. And we can't even think for 30 months, let alone 30 years in the United States. So they're being proactive. The rest of us are being reactive. And I think that's why you see this constant, back to our original conversation, it's this race to the bottom,
yeah.
right? It's who can devalue their currency the most to make their current incumbent leaders feel the most powerful. And what, again, back to the UK, what we just realized is you're not permanent, right? Boris, you're out, right? And now we got this new person who is trying to appease the masses to become populist, doing dumb economic things that will cause more strife and more problem. And then she'll end up, thrown in the trash bin as well. I mean, my
Yeah.
opinion.
Just on London that you mentioned, it has been the sort of cradle of the financial engineering of
Yeah.
everything. And even I know America allegedly under the Thatcher era brought the big boom. So there was some element that there was an exporting of the aggressive banking
Yeah.
mentality, investment banking as well from the States too. But in essence, it's the source of, the Lloyds and everything. It's the source of financial engineering. And that's just not a good play. And it's actually going to give a lot of store to the socialist worker. They have the socialist worker in London. These guys who normally sit in the corner, they're pretty communist friendly and red hats and all of that. But they actually, and this is not because I'm a fan of them, they're complete anathema to me, but they're actually going to be right on one thing in that they said, we gave up all the stuff that we did for the big financial game. And on that point, in essence, they're right, because Britain did mine, they did manufacture. I mean, Birmingham are all mining towns, Newcastle and Liverpool were ports and mining towns, and shipbuilding and various other things, that
Yeah.
car making, et cetera, et cetera. And the manufacturing base has been absolutely gutted out of them, part because they were the original industrial revolution. Most of the apartment blocks that we used to wholesale buy in Manchester, where they named the hat factory and the candle works, and these were things were being made there, and
Things.
these
Yeah.
just ceased to exist. And they kind of committed to the southeastern London conglomerate financialization of everything, and then everything became services, which brings me to the great argument about GDP, on the basis that a couple of lawyers and of investment bankers packaging together collateralized debt obligations, the brain power of these people and the value of that work by hour will rack up into tens of thousands per day, going into 100,000s in weeks, in terms of perceived value and services. And there'll be lots of money moving backwards and forwards for this process. But in terms of the back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, instead of building an orchard or a grapevine or solar paneling up or extracting gas and oil, we're going to have all the elements that were very aggressively financially engineering. The tertiary extraction, when you mentioned the student loan thing, to me, you were talking about Ronald Reagan, and then, we need not so many people to get too smart. There is an element of that. But to me, it was just about how do we extend banking, where we put people on the wrong side of a compound interest equation, into everything that we do, so that essentially, I love the US, by the way, and the American people are awesome. I've visited many times. I won't go while it's mandatory for a vaccine, I'm afraid, and until that one drops, I won't be there again for a while. But I mean Moab, Utah, everything. I'm not the cities guy, I'm the spaces and the people. They're awesome. But the incredible thing is tertiary extraction, it is beyond in car. I saw all the signs: buy a Ford truck on a 72-month basis. I think my father paid off his home faster than that with a 60% balloon payment. So actually, you buy 40% of the car in about 6 years on a highly depreciating asset. And that to me was, America took the financialization of just about everything, and guys just know payments. They don't know the actual purchase price.
No,
It's like,
it's a it's an incredibly important point that it goes back to this idea of ownership versus renting.
Renting.
And
Yeah.
what financialization is um, is the creation of a rental culture.
Yeah.
And
Society.
to your point, if all you focus on is the payment, then you're renting, right? You don't own the car, you don't own your house, you are renting it. And what that does again is it puts the assets in the hands of the few, and their stock appreciate. One of my favorite stats from the lockdowns was, lockdown was supposed to be this we're doing this for you, for your good, for your health. I'm like, well, actually what happened is $3.5 trillion, which is a lot of money, $3.5 trillion went from regular savers to a very small number of people at the top of management of certain big companies. And
Yeah.
that's a direct wealth transfer based on policy decisions.
Yeah.
And when you do that over and over and over again, and to your point earlier, you hollow out the middle class, eventually, and that has led to revolts and uprisings. Now I don't know if that will happen this time because of they say religion is, organized religion is the opiate of the masses. I think media is the opiate of the masses today, right? The
Yeah.
media and the constant barrage of, dumbing down of content. And like, I don't care what the Kardashians do ever. I just don't care. But there are a lot of people who are fed that, and I think
Very
by
much the bed and circuses of today, isn't it?
yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
On the rental extraction side, the stock market has been set up and positioned to hyper value subscription over outright payment. So you used to be able to buy Microsoft Office, now you rent it in the cloud in the
Yep.
name of being more convenient. But what it actually means is you don't own it, you'll rent it. I had proxy discussions with people quite high up in the VW group, which brings you back Europe side. And one of the roles for crypto, and I think we should have a chat on crypto as well because you've got strong views, but that they will eventually build cars to the full spec and they will standardize everything, put everything in, and you will buy part of the vehicle. In other words, if you can't afford an aircon and a radio and tape or whatever the case may be, or
Yep.
various other features, they'll be put in anyway, but you won't own them. So you'll actually have parts of the car that are not yours. And
Oh,
then
you
every
just
time
saw that, Francis. I mean, BMW just released seat warmers subscription. So they claim it's cheaper to
wow.
put the seat warmer in every car. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's just not possible that it's cheaper.
Yeah.
But
So they're
but
going to
fine.
use the scale arguments. I'm amazed. You've given me the first real example. I've been
Oh, it's
talking
real.
about this for 3 years, but it's the first time someone's actually said it's already happening. And essentially,
Oh,
you
just
might.
2 weeks ago. Just 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago.
Oh wow, that's great. I'd love a source for that actually, because that's a prophecy that's come true just through talking to high up people. And you'll actually have a micro payment wallet in the car where you'll sort of have, it could be, let's say XRP because it's cheap and it's
Yep.
fast, but it could be XYZ, anything.
Yep.
And as you use elements that were not included in the car, they get to subscription. So the whole thing about rental extraction is that you will be every day, you will have a perpetual bleed out of micro payments going out of a
Yeah.
wallet that you're going to have to, by necessity, make regular dollar lump sums into.
Yeah.
And that's how the vehicle manufacturers, because as they make better cars that run longer, that have better service, actually they talk themselves out of business. In the same way, the pharmaceutical people don't want you too healthy,
Don't be
otherwise they're killing
healthy. I don't like healthy
and
people.
no, it's not helpful. So it's not in terms of curing you, it's in terms of managing the symptoms and ensuring you come back.
Yeah.
Hence why we also saw, and we predicted this because of the subscription model, that there won't just be one vaccine. They're going to say they're going to have to
Oh
update
yeah.
and necessitate. And we predicted that 2 years ago, before even the lockdowns. It's all about a vaccine. And what's actually happened is they've metamorphosized, one of them allegedly being sourced from here, in Southern Africa. Meanwhile, it was just supposedly the lab that picked it up because they have good labs down here and not much else in the rest of Africa. And they created the variant. I can't even remember the name. You'll probably shout it out. And
No,
then
but
that
here's the thing. It's not even a vaccine, right? And
no,
it's not a
correct.
vaccine, right?
Yeah.
And that's just fact, right? You know, so, oh, you're an anti-vax. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, right? I believe in real vaccines, right? You take an attenuated virus and you put it in a vaccine form, and I'll take it, right? That's great. You wanna cure, stop me from getting polio or chickenpox? No problem, because
Yeah.
those can be vaccinated against. What you can't vaccinate against is
It's true.
a cold virus, a flu virus
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
mutates. And we've known that for years, yet they still have flu vaccines, which again, they don't work. They have about 20% efficacy because you're guessing as to what mutation you're going to put in. So this is worse than that, right? This isn't even an attenuated virus. This is a novel therapeutic, untested in humans up until the EA mandate, EUA, emergency use authorization. And the reason it was never injected into humans before that is because it was killing the animals. So that's a whole nother story for another day.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's not a vaccine. And the thing about it is, look, could it be efficacious? It was certainly possible. Now, it turns out the data says it's probably not very efficacious. But to your point, it's never been about health. It's been about money and this subscription. And now Fauci literally just 3 days ago said, we're going to recommend that everyone get a booster every year. I'm like, but there's data that doesn't corroborate that, right? There's data that says it doesn't work. It doesn't prevent spread. It doesn't even prevent symptoms now. And
No,
so
you're actively worse off with
yeah,
ongoing. You're
yeah,
actively worse off until you become dependent on short-term boosts from it, until your immune system is wrecked and you almost rely on it. It's a bit
yeah.
like cancer treatments as well, which
Yeah.
effectively
Don't get me
just
started on that. I lost a
yeah,
good friend to a cancer when I asked that when the doctor wanted to give him a chemo drug, and he had a brain tumor, and chemo cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, right?
no,
Absolute fact. And I'm not a doctor, but this is a fact that I know to be true, right? Chemotherapy drugs cannot cross the blood-brain barrier.
no,
So I said, so why would you give him chemo? He says, well, there's a chance that it could work. I'm like, no, here's all the data that says it can't happen. Well, it
mm,
turns out his research was sponsored by the company,
yeah,
and he was paid $100,000 to prescribe these medicines that were paid for by insurance, which
yeah,
means I'm paying for it because it's my company. And so it was the most egregious violation of trust. And this will come back to the crypto. Why does crypto matter? Because crypto establishes trust, right? Blockchain technology establishes trust for the first time, breaking away from the cabal for 800 years. And look, 800 years is a long run. They should be happy they had the run of the banking and trusted third party. Pharma could be a secondary, financial engineering piece of that. But the banking trust came from, in the old days, I lent you money. Okay. Francis owes me $100. You come back with $110. Oh, you know what, Francis? You owe me 220 because I'm untrustworthy. I wrote down Francis owes me 200. You had to trust me that I didn't write down the right amount, right? That I did write down the right amount. So then the Medicis, benevolent as they are, said, oh, no. Francis, you write down 100. Mark will write down 100. And we, the benevolent Medicis, for a small fee, will determine that the ledgers match. And they are a trusted third party. So in order for me to send you money, I have to have a bank account. You have to have a bank account. And then they charge us a fee to send you the money.
mm,
But here's the problem. Since you're in South Africa and I'm in America, now when I send you money, the Rothschilds have to get paid because they signed
mm,
a treaty 400 years ago that said any money that crosses international borders has to go through Bank of International
yeah,
Settlements and they get paid. Like,
yeah,
well, okay, But how about this? How about I take an open, cryptographically secure ledger where now I have a token, a record of title of an asset, Bitcoin or anything else, and I transfer it to you seamlessly, instantaneously, with no fees. We know the transfer happens because the software validates it,
Yeah.
and it's public. We can all verify it. So that system is so antithetical to the current system that they're going to fight. And I always say it's the Mandela quote that I guess Mandela didn't actually say. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I can't remember who actually did say it, but from 2009 to 15, first they ignore you. Bunch of nerds and geeks playing with your funny magic internet money. Who cares? Then they laugh at you. So 2016 to 21, look at these nerds and geeks playing with their magic internet money. Then they fight you. So right now, probably for the next 5 or 6 years, the banks are going to fight because this is real money, billions of dollars is leaving the traditional financial services world and migrating into crypto. And to your point, imagine a world, this is a beautiful world, where you're in your vehicle that you don't own. You're in the back, right? Self-driving vehicle needs to charge. It doesn't go charge for 2 hours somewhere. It pulls up to the fast charge station. You don't get out of the car and put in a plastic card into the smelly machine. You just sit in the back doing whatever you're doing. The car charges up. The car pays the machine, pulls away, to your point, the micropayments wallet.
Yeah.
Then you get onto the highway and you're sitting in traffic. And you don't want to sit in traffic. You want to go in the fast lane. So you don't get in the fast lane and have a picture of your license and they send you a bill for $4. The car pays the fast lane to go. And all of this is coming, and it's all going to have to happen on cryptographically secure payment rails that aren't based on 70-year-old technology of Fedwire and ACH and Swift. But that disruption, and the reason I'm so bullish about crypto, that disruption is orders of magnitude bigger than the disruption that happened with the internet. Like right now, you and I are speaking halfway around the world for free, okay, for free. The phone companies used to charge us $3 to $4 per minute.
Yeah.
Right? 20 years ago, this would have cost us an arm and a leg to have this conversation, and we couldn't do it in video. We had to do it in audio. But because of the internet, and they tried to block that, right? They tried to pass legislation to make voice over IP illegal, so we couldn't do this. But they failed because ultimately, technology that makes things better will eventually come to light. Now, oftentimes it can be
I challenge you on this?
Yeah.
I love this whole analogy, and it's one point where I see 100% what you've said. So I've been engaged in the crypto markets extensively, but B, I have multitude of scenarios of how it all works out for this.
Yeah.
So let me pitch a different view to you, which is not my only view, but it's a contrarian one in spirit of two intelligent people having testing.
Absolutely. Dialogue and debate in search of truth.
Yeah. So the foundational principles of the people you've mentioned is they will never let you have your own money. I repeat it 3 times for my community. The whole emphasis of the family you mentioned is it doesn't matter about laws. The control of the issuance of money is everything. In short, they will never let you have your own money. We saw that with an American citizen who actually backed e-gold and actually run it legitimately and had gold 100% to every issuance of it. So he was actually an honest broker. And of course, he was unwound and it was catching on a long time. We also know the NSA in 1996 did a thought piece, call it a white paper, if you will, on something very much that replicates to Bitcoin, a paid person-to-person payment machine. The key element, if I was running a grand game, is I need to capture the cynical and most skeptical and smart people. So I have to start with something that will get the libertarians. So I've engineered this great over-lending environment that invariably has the crash that we know as the great financial crisis, which was probably a depression, but depressions you only acknowledge long in hindsight because it depresses people to say the word depression. But that was a depression. It was 2 years of negative growth. It was banking system failure. That is those are the definitions of a depression, or less people know them. So we had that depression, and then they released conceptually this element, which has largely only existed now in a reflationary environment. Whilst there's been some stock market corrections, the biggest ones, .com, 2008-9, it has only existed in this proliferate environment. And I sometimes encourage maxis to think, Bitcoin maxis, as they sometimes I like, and sometimes I find them a bit toxic. So I encourage them to think, and to almost in an antagonism. I got a chart up where I actually showed, and I'm not a fan of the ARK. I'm actually short ARK, and I will share screen here. But I got Kathy Wood's ARK, and I actually showed that since March 2020, since the big proliferation we've had, that in actual fact, Bitcoin has lagged ARK and is a higher beta lagging proxy for ARK. Now, I could have used many other stocks.
Look, it's a really important point, and we should come back and have another conversation because I have to run here in a second. But here's my I will agree with you, but I'll give you a piece of information that I know you don't have that has put my similar fears to rest. So I have the exact same fears as you. That look, if the number one way to control people is to control money, right? And Thomas Jefferson, all the way back to our founding fathers, said it best, right? Banks who can issue their own currency are more dangerous than standing armies, right? And if the people ever allow the banks to issue their currency, they'll find their grandchildren, homeless on the land that their forefathers conquered. Totally, and that's not exactly the word for word,
yes,
but
I know the quote well, and you captured it pretty well.
And so that is 100% true. So if you type in Satoshi Nakamoto into Google, you actually will get the words intelligence central, because Nakamoto is the surname of people in Japan who live in the central region, and Satoshi is the word for intelligence. So I was like, oh my God, this is simply a game exactly as you described, where the central intelligence organizations collectively take that fringe element, get them to contribute capital and embrace the thing, and then take it all out the back door. But here's the thing. Scott Stornetta, who is the co-founder of blockchain technology, the most cited person in the Satoshi white paper, so cited 3 times in the footnotes, if anyone actually reads the footnotes. He's a venture partner of ours at Morgan Creek. And I asked him, I said, Scott, what do you think about this? And he said, I have never thought about that question. Let me think about this. Well, I think it's entirely feasible. In fact, probably even likely. But here's the problem. There is an air gap in the way Bitcoin works and the way the blockchain works that there can be no backdoor, right? We think of backdoors in the traditional way where, someone codes in a way to get in and take what someone else puts in. Said it can't happen. I was like, tell me more. And so he went into some of the technical details that again I won't do justice to, but he convinced me that if that is true, right? If NSA and CIA created Bitcoin with the intent to steal it from a back door later, that's impossible. Now, if there's another leg to the plan, it could still be that they engineered it, but I don't know how they can win.
There's another scenario that could occur, and I'm sensitive to that. You haven't got all the time left, but maybe they wash everybody out and it's their elite money. But the point is, we're definitely heading for a surveillance finance era.
Yeah.
It's already deeply on us. When you mentioned voice over internet protocol being resisted, eventually they forewent the toll for the free Skype call for the actual
Yes.
recording, surveillance, and capture. In other
Yes.
words, they found
100%.
something that was worth more than that, the data. The
100%.
metadata, I'm talking to you, I'm here, they know who I am, they know where I am, they know what my Facebook picture looks like if I have a Facebook, etc. They know who you are, they
Yep.
know where that data now has transcended the value of the cost of that call. So
Yep.
now we're moving into the surveillance, finance, and big data realm. They forego monopolies and create new monopolies all the time, providing there's a new value. And when you think you're getting something for free, it's when you're being patsied and you haven't seen the business, the model.
No,
And
look, I think it's again a brilliant insight. The one thing that gives me hope, and to this point, it's just hope. CBDCs, okay, central bank digital currencies. There's already a
yeah,
Chinese, U.S. is working
it's
on
coming.
it, Russia's working on it. Those are surveillance monetary system. And if you've seen the video of the BIS guy,
Yes,
Augustin,
Constance,
yeah,
the
giant guy,
silly
right?
man.
Kingpin,
Yeah,
where he describes, well, how of course we should program how you use your money. It's frightening. I mean, it's absolutely
yeah.
frightening. It's like
It's
a minute and 34 seconds of pure horror film. So CBDC's evil, pure evil incarnate. Bitcoin, at least today, while it's not completely anonymous, isn't surveillance friendly, meaning the state actors can't surveil it the way, like a friend of mine worked at Google. We were early investors in Google. And he said that there are these two trunks. I mean, there was one trunk that came in, the main trunk from AT&T, and then it split literally into two closets. And the one closet, he was the tech and he would go work on. And he said, what's that other closet? Don't ask.
yeah.
Don't ask. It's like, to your point, every single piece of information that flows goes to the surveillance agent. Okay, good. Bitcoin, they don't have that because it's run in a decentralized way. Now,
We
can they
hope.
get snippets? Can they back into analysis? Sure. Can they tell which coins are tainted? Sure. But again, it's a conversation for another day because to me, it is the conversation. There's no question that in my mind, okay, personal opinion, one person couldn't have created Bitcoin.
No.
It's so technologically flawless. I mean, little things like there will never be a 51% attack, which is not possible with current computing. But if it were, there would never be one because the moment you did it, the value would go to zero. So there's an inherent, unless you just wanted to fuck with the system, which spend hundreds of millions of dollars to mess, you'd have to be a really strange person to do that. And maybe someone could do that, but there's no incentive to do that. And then
No.
the halving builds in a number go up mentality that attracts activity and trading. And yes, it leads to cycles of bull and bear and boom and bust. But it does, if we look at the series of higher lows over 14 years, the value of the network has increased. And I think it's because of this built-in block reward cycle. So there's lots of things about it that are too elegant for a single person.
I call the whole Satoshi Nakamoto a fairy tale for adults, in the same way we tell kids about Santa Claus.
Yeah.
That there's this benevolent creator that's built this entire thing, disappeared into the ether, never collected his awards for, never moved the money.
Yeah.
This smells of big mega corporate big money. And you've got to remember that BlackRock has Aladdin and various other computing powers.
Look,
It's kind of like we're still fighting with sticks and stones in comparison.
Let's come back and talk about this another time. It's been great to hang out with you.
Yeah.
I like finding kindred spirits even when they're halfway around the world. I actually used to come to South Africa every year. I used to come down to Joburg to go to a place called African Leadership Academy, which is this amazing educational institution that we have a relationship with. and love coming down there. But I only made it to one of the most beautiful places on the world, Cape Town, once. But oh my gosh, unbelievable.
Yeah, it is
So,
lovely. I'm going down in a week. How do people, if they want to get hear more and clearly a kindred spirit, as you said, somebody who's switched on and knows the orchestrate, how do they engage if they would like to
so I'm
find
easy
you?
to find on Twitter, just at Mark Yusko, MarkYusko. We have a website, morgancreekcap.com. There's some links to information there and some videos. We also have a YouTube channel called Around the
Great.
World with Yusko. If you type Around the World with Yusko, YouTube channel will pop up, and there's video presentations and things on all different topics, but a lot of them tend to migrate lately toward crypto. Um, and I'm pretty open on DM. I'm really bad at email, and uh, I'm relatively easy to find. So appreciate you
Great.
reaching
We'll
out.
put some of those links down. Yeah, we'll put some of those links down. Thank you for having this discussion. I have that deep feeling we've got more to discuss, and
Oh,
I look forward to
absolutely.
having
We'll do
more
it again.
in a couple of months, but you'll need to make more time for it. Mark, thank you very much for coming on, and links will be in below for people to contact you should they want some more of your services. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Have a great
Thanks,
day there.
Francis. Appreciate it.